The film begins by showing a man who has been staying in an empty room in Paris, and he's been there for 2 days just watching a building across the street. This guy is known as the Killer, and he's a professional hitman. He's waiting for his target, but the problem is he doesn't know when the target will show up. So he's stuck watching the place all the time. While he's waiting, the Killer does some yoga and goes out to get some food. Just when he's out buying food, he gets a call from Hodges, the person who hired him. Hodges tells him that the target might show up in 2 days, but he's not completely sure. The target could come on some other day. The Killer gets really frustrated with this vague info, and he slams and stomps on his phone. So, the Killer goes back to that empty building and keeps an eye on the one the target will visit. He reminds himself not to feel bad if he wants to succeed. The Killer is famous for keeping a secret record of all his kills, and he's done a lot of them, but no one's ever figured them out. One night, while he's checking his gun's position, a guy shows up at the door. The Killer quickly points his gun towards the door. Fortunately, the man changes his mind about entering and only disposes of some trash before leaving. Later, the Killer tries to rest a bit, but he's still waiting for the target. So, he sets his watch to beep every 5 minutes to stay awake. When he's ready, he sees signs that the target is coming because a servant is getting a room ready for him. The Killer gets all his stuff ready, including his rifle. After a while, he spots his target, an old businessman with lots of companies in different countries. He also sees that the target is with a female entertainer. The Killer takes aim and shoots, but his hand shakes, and he ends up hitting the entertainer by mistake. After the Killer messed up and accidentally shot the wrong person, he quickly packed up all his assassin stuff and left the empty building. He hopped on a motorcycle and got rid of some evidence in the sewer and a parked garbage truck. When he reached a bridge, he got off the motorcycle, crossed the bridge, and threw away his helmet. Meanwhile, the guards at the target's place started looking into the attack. Even the police were keeping an eye on the airport, so the Killer couldn't leave France right away. He had to make a fake identity and buy a flight ticket to go abroad. While waiting for his flight, he got a call from Hodges, who was really mad about the Killer messing up. Hodges told him he had to finish the job or face some serious consequences. On the plane, the Killer felt uneasy because there was this strange guy watching him all the time. When he got to a transit airport, he realized the guy was still following him. So he decided to stay in an airport hotel overnight and kept an eye on the guy in case he had to deal with him. Luckily, the guy didn't do anything, and the Killer took another flight to the Dominican Republic, where he planned to hide. When the Killer got to the airport, he rushed to his girlfriend Mugala's house in the countryside using his favorite car. It was a long ride, but he finally got to her gate and noticed some strange footprints and cigarette butts around. He got worried that something might be wrong, so he took his weapon and quietly went into her house. Inside, he saw her living room all messed up and a bloodstain, but Mugala was nowhere to be seen. Without wasting time, he rushed to the hospital, and as he suspected, Mugala was badly hurt and in intensive care. The Killer then talked to Marcus, a guy who was close to Mugala, to find out what happened. Marcus told him that 2 strangers, a strong guy and a skinny woman, had come to their house in a taxi and attacked Mugala. The Killer got really mad and promised Marcus that nothing like that would happen to Mugala again. Later, when Mugala woke up, she told the Killer that she didn't reveal anything about his true identity, even though the attackers tried to make her talk. Without thinking twice, the Killer, who was really upset about what happened to his girlfriend, went back home to get his hidden weapons from the backyard. The next morning, he started looking into the people who attacked Mugala. He went to the taxi company that might have driven the attackers and scared the owner into giving him info about the taxi driver who took them to Mugala's place. The owner was really scared, so he let the Killer find out that a taxi driver named Leo Rodriguez had driven them there. The next day, the Killer, who had been watching and waiting, finally found Leo, who was waiting for passengers by the road. The Killer acted like he needed a ride and got into Leo's taxi. He quietly got his weapon ready in the passenger seat and asked Leo to stop in a quiet spot. While pointing his gun, the Killer asked Leo about the 2 passengers he had taken to a hidden place near the woods, just like Marcus had told him. Scared, Leo gave information about what the two people looked like, which matched what Marcus had said. To keep his crimes secret, the killer decided to shoot Leo and then set out to find the people who hurt his girlfriend. After that, the killer flew to New Orleans to meet Hodges. He rented a van in the city to trick Hodges' tight office security. Before going to the Hodges office, the killer went to his storage place where he kept fake IDs, including a fake license plate he used to fool the police. After getting what he needed, he bought some tools to look like a recycling worker so he could easily get into Hodges' office. Not long after, the killer managed to get into Hodges' office without any trouble. He pointed his weapon at Hodges' secretary, Dolores, and told her to take him to her boss. Dolores, who was scared and held as a hostage, led the killer into Hodges' office. Inside, the killer tied up Hodges in his chair, while Dolores seemed tied up in the bathroom. The contract killer started asking Hodges about the attack on Mugala a few days ago. Hodges said he didn't want to be involved in the attack and reminded the killer that it happened because he had left the mission in Paris unfinished. This made the killer really angry, so he destroyed Hodges' laptop with records of their past missions. He also hurt Hodges with a tool he had brought, trying to make him reveal who the attackers of Mugala were. Sadly, before the killer could get the information he wanted, Hodges was already hurt badly from the earlier attack. When the killer saw this, he talked to Dolores, and she agreed to tell him who the culprits were but asked him to make her death look like an accident so her child could get life insurance money. The killer agreed, put Hodges' body in a big trash bin, and took it to Dolores' house. At Dolores' house, she showed the killer where all the info about the contract killers Hodges had hired was stored, including the two who hurt Mugala. She also told him who the main client was, the one who hired the killer through Hodges to kill the old man in Paris. After getting all this info, the killer made Dolores' death look like she fell down the stairs by twisting her head from behind as she was going down the stairs. That night, the killer went back to his storage place to cut up Hodges' body. Then he got on a ferry and threw some of the lawyer's body parts into the sea. He buried the rest of the pieces so the police couldn't figure out what happened. The next day, the killer went to Florida to deal with one of the guys who attacked Mugala, a strong guy called the Brute. He found out where the Brute lived and saw him walking with his friends, along with a pit bull dog. The killer realized that the dog might mess up his plans, so he bought meat mixed with sleeping pills for the dog. Then he followed the Brute and his friends to a bar. After they came back home, the killer gave the drugged meat to the dog. But things didn't go as planned. The Brute figured out someone was after him, and they fought. The killer, who had lots of experience, finally beat the Brute and shot him dead. When the dog heard the gunshot, it got scared and tried to chase the killer. Luckily, the killer stopped the dog and set the Brute's house on fire to get rid of any evidence of the murder. On another day, the killer flew to New York to deal with another person who attacked Mugala, known as the Expert. He watched her from a car and waited for her to leave her place. After a few hours, he saw her getting into a taxi, so he followed her. He found out she was going to a fancy restaurant. The killer went inside and approached the Expert, who realized he was there to kill her. She told him she had ordered a tasty meal and asked him to eat with her before he did it. The killer refused the offer because he was worried the food might be poisoned. So he convinced her to leave the restaurant with him, and when they got to a nearby park, he shot her. A few days later, the killer went back to Paris to deal with the person who hired him, thinking that person had teamed up with Hodges to teach him a lesson. He followed the old client to a fancy apartment, but he couldn't open the locked door. He had to order a fake key online to make a copy. While waiting for the key to avoid looking suspicious, the killer pretended to sign up for a gym membership in the building and bought illegal weapons from the criminal underground. The next morning, the killer got his fake key and went to the apartment building. He used a worker's ID card to copy it onto the key panel and get inside the client's apartment. Once he was in, he showed the client his contract killer card. The client was confused at first, but realized the killer was the one hired by Hodges. The client looked scared and admitted that Hodges told him to pay an extra $150,000 because the job in Paris had gone wrong. The killer tried to get the client to talk about the attack on Mugala, but the client seemed lost. So the killer thought the client wasn't involved in hurting his girlfriend and decided not to kill him. He found out that Hodges was the one behind the attack on Mugala. In the end, the movie shows the killer going back to the Dominican Republic and reuniting with his girlfriend, who was getting better. They seemed happy and peaceful after the killer got revenge on the people who hurt his girlfriend. Moral lesson from the story is, in a world of spies and assassins, sometimes you just need patience and a little yoga to solve your problems.